Welcome, my darlings. Make yourself comfortable, and I have a tale to tell you. If you enjoy it, please be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and leave me a comment. I always enjoy your comments. Now, let us begin. Gaia's Decay by Scare in a Box. Sometimes the greatest horrors start with the smallest complaints. Only one thing was missing from Lonnie's life, and his wife never let him forget it. They had a lovely house, money enough to feel secure, and have new things, food to eat and friends to socialize. But Sarah and Lonnie did not have a child. After trying for years, even going through rounds of IVF treatment, they still had no child. Had this been a choice they made, perhaps Lonnie and Sarah could have come to terms. But Sarah never made the choice not to have a child. It was all she wanted. And honestly, Lonnie wanted it too. They'd even selected their house on the basis of the lovely positioning of the nursery within. The day that nursery was converted into a home gym caused a huge shift in their life. For a while, Sarah fell into a depression. Then she adopted a cat. It was old and had lived a hard life. Sarah seemed to like the idea of caring for it. Lonnie thought that was the end of the baby problem. Then one day, as they sat on their porch staring out at the sunset, Sarah stopped petting the cat in her lap and turned, a darkly serious expression, towards Lonnie. "I'm going to get pregnant, darling." The odd spark in her eye kept Lonnie awake late that night. He kept picturing her speaking. What new plan had she hatched? And how could he get her to talk to him? Over the next weeks, Sarah began making similar unsettling remarks. "Darling," she would say, her voice tinged with a disturbed tone. "It will be soon. I'm going to be pregnant. You'll see." Lonnie feared that his beloved wife was losing her grip on reality. Still, life went on, and he went to work in the mornings and came home in the evenings. As a physicist, he didn't make what he considered tons of money, but it was enough to support their little household. And that meant to him plenty of time for Sarah to find something that gave her life purpose. He imagined painting or gardening. So much time spent apart. He could almost convince himself that Sarah was normal when she wasn't making her proclamations. One evening, after a long day at work, Lonnie arrived home to see an eerie sight. A cable-like object extended from the ground and snaked its way into the house. He took a closer look, and the material appeared to be organic. Though part of him wanted to inspect the place, this cable emerged further. The bigger part of Lonnie instantly thought about Sarah inside the house with this thing, and of her odd statements of late. The cable reminded him in a way he didn't like of a giant umbilical cord. Lonnie hurried inside to find the cable snaking through the house towards the back, where the stairs up to the upstairs bedroom were. He followed it. At the base of the stairs, Lonnie discovered their cat, perfectly still, with the cable attached to its belly. Before Lonnie could react and reach out for the creature, the cable twitched, and a pulse of energy rolled out on the air. The cat began to shrink. With each pulse of energy, time seemed to roll backwards for the feline. First of all, the gray left its whiskers. Then, instead of a chubby, middle-aged house cat, it instead looked like a lean, feral creature. And then it was a kitten. Then a smaller kitten. Eyes shut as if they'd never opened. Lonnie stared. At the last change took place, and he was staring at a fetal feline laying at the foot of the stairs. "Holy," Lonnie said. Then, in a jerky movement, something pulled both the cord and the fetus up the stairs. This was only the beginning. Lonnie's life now had almost nothing he would want. The world had almost nothing he would want, including the awful stench that lay heavy on the air. And as he strapped his diving helmet on, The stench retreated enough for him to think. He reasoned that the complete lack of anything to live for was all the more reason he needed to do something. He found the old model diving suit he wore at a local thrift store and left money on the counter for it. Though no one was there to take the payment, Lonnie had a delusion of his own now. This can be undone. Someone can be saved. Sometimes he even managed to believe. Lonnie hopped onto the road bike and made sure his prized possessions were secured. A chainsaw and an underwater scooter. With these things in place, Lonnie took off towards what he considered the center of this new monstrous world. A huge swell rose from the ground just outside of town. This thing looked like nothing more than an overgrown pregnant belly, right down to the red stretch marks and veins that peered out through its skin. From the apex of this belly grew a towering corpse flower, larger than any naturally grown flower, and with the stink grown to match its size. If only this mound had been ornamental and the stench had been the worst crime. But that was not true. The monstrous belly with a towering corpse flower atop it claimed all forms of life. In a few short months, it had reduced the world to a barren wasteland, devoid of plants, animals, and people. Men, women, children, animals, plants, anything with life had been drawn into this horror. Lonnie was seemingly the only survivor, and he couldn't shake the feeling that his presence was spared because of his connection to Sarah. He blazed on his bike across the landscape and glanced behind him at the back of the bike, where the last item of vital value rested, a handheld container marked with the word atonement. It might be too late already to rebuild or repair, but atonement was always possible. Or so Lonnie hoped, as the rotting sweet smell of the corpse flower drew nearer. He could smell it, even through the partially sealed suit. He hoped, once fully sealed and used canned oxygen, that the suit would be able to lock that out. As he rose towards the bloated mass, pregnant with all the life it had been able to steal, he took strength in a memory. It was not a pleasant recollection, perhaps even just a creation of his own mind, though Lonnie didn't think so. He recalled a dream. In this dream that had come to him only once the night before, Sarah appeared before him, her voice echoing through his mind. "The birth of the second desecration is near, darling." This cryptic message left Lonnie both bewildered and filled with dread. Determined to confront the abomination that consumed the world, he steadied his path along the deserted highway. Not that this had been a deserted highway a year before. He had driven on it with Sarah plenty of times, usually stuck in traffic jams with only her soft, cool voice keeping him from raging. Now that same voice drove him on in a very different way. Now Sarah was part of the monster. But even if he could save nothing else, maybe he could save her. The fact that he was alive implied she was still in there and still cared. And that had to mean something. Driven by love and a glimmer of hope, Lonnie approached the monstrosity on the horizon. The giant pregnant belly rooted in the ground appeared ominous and foreboding. The sickly sweet stench of decay filled his lungs and stung his eyes. As he drew nearer, he could see the giant boulders that had been tossed aside like pebbles as the belly emerged. Now they lay around the base like bubbles in the worst bubble bath ever. Lonnie contemplated his options and the weight of the responsibility he bore. His wife's essence resided within this abomination, and he alone could determine its fate. Summoning his courage, Lonnie hooked up the air to his suit. It cut out the awful scent, at least for a moment. Lonnie almost wished it hadn't, since with that oppressive rot gone from his lungs, he had to face his next task. He had to get inside the monstrosity. He carefully set his hand on the atonement sticker and then pulled his equipment down from the road bike. The chainsaw came first. He turned it on and listened for a moment to the sound of its blade, half expecting the horror in front of him to respond. It did not. The rest of the world was still. No, still was too light a word. The rest of the world was dead. He walked on the bones of a corpse, begging for vengeance. Lonnie swung the chainsaw against the mottled flesh of the belly. It squished and oozed, slicing easily. Red fluid leaked out with a slimy yellow substance. Some splashed against Lonnie's helmet, giving the world a blotchy red sheen. He didn't stop. There was no turning back and nothing to turn back towards. In short order, Lonnie had opened a gap in the monstrous belly using his chainsaw. For a long moment he stood, chainsaw in hand, and stared into this pathway into the unknown. He had predictions for what lay inside, but this was uncharted territory. To know anything, he'd have to go in. Lonnie turned the chainsaw off and set it on his road bike. He doubted he'd see either tool again. But if this was the last living hand to affect the face of the earth, he'd leave as neat a mark as he could. His hand tightened around the handhold of the atonement container. All his hopes were there. Then, hoisting the water scooter, Lonnie took in a deep breath of canned air and ventured inside the demonic swell. Darkness covered him. Encased in this tomb, Lonnie moved slowly at first, only with his headlamp to guide him. As his eyes adjusted to the eerie, reddish light that filtered in through the skin and muscles of the belly, he saw more of his new surroundings. The interior revealed a cavernous expanse of flesh arcing above and in meaty walls around him. He traveled with an eye to get to the center. He had an idea of what was there. After all, Sarah had promised him a pregnancy, and a pregnancy implied a fetus. Here inside the glowing heat of the belly, Lonnie could not even pretend that anything he did could bring the world back. There was nothing to restore. He'd always known that. From the first time he truly accepted it. This was all there was, and he was headed towards the center of that evil. Sure enough, he came to the central lake, filled with amniotic fluid. It was too dark to see anything within the vast waters, yet small waves lapped out, implying some sort of movement within. Without hesitation, Lonnie plunged into the fluid, utilizing the underwater scooter to navigate swiftly through the watery depths. He kept a firm hold to his atonement. The air inside his helmet tasted stale. Lonnie was sure that he had time left before he ran out of air, but not endless time. He was certain that breathing the air in this place would be death. He couldn't afford fear or indecision. The fluid clung around him hot and thick, much thicker than water, more like swimming through blood, though it was as clear as water, clear enough to see the bones that floated mixed in with the fluid and the vines. At the lake's bottom, he encountered the abomination, the twisted fusion of human, animal, and plant, known as the second desecration. Sarah had uttered those words to him. He only believed them, yet somehow he expected it to be a creature from the deep recesses of depravity. Perhaps it was, but in its way, the second desecration was also a baby, though nearly 4 times as large as Lonnie already. Its facial features were almost human. Large eyes, a human nose, and a mouth. Extra appendages grew from its back and sides, but its limbs still had the frail look of a fetus. This monstrosity was not yet fit to live outside its womb. Now was the only moment. Drawn closer by a mixture of curiosity, desperation, and love, Lonnie clutched the container tightly. Within it lay something dreadful and oddly wonderful, something that had only been possible through his work in physics, a devastating mass-destructive device, the first antimatter bomb. It was a weapon he had never desired to see made real, yet now he saw its potential as a means to reshape the impending reality. He'd come to destroy this thing as it had destroyed his world and his life. Amid the grotesque scene, a thought penetrated Lonnie's mind. If his wife had transformed into the vessel for the second desecration's birth, could this creature, in some unfathomable way, be the son she had always longed for? That Lonnie himself had always wanted? Images of the world as it once was flooded his thoughts. A world already lost irretrievably. Ending the second desecration now would not bring that world back. But to do nothing would have consequences. He imagined the horror that would unfold if he allowed the second desecration to come into existence. A nightmarish realm, akin to hell on earth. In the midst of his contemplation, Lonnie understood the precipice before him. The only thing that remained was to decide. Should he release the destructive form within the container, returning everything to the void? Or should he permit his son to live, thereby allowing the birth of a distorted and contorted new world? Either act was an end for Lonnie, an end for the world. In the end, Lonnie didn't have anything except for a choice. So quoth this raven. I am so sorry, my darlings, for abandoning you mostly last month. And I hope to get back on track at least 2 a week, hopefully 3. I hope you are all doing well and having a beautiful summer or winter. I know some of you are in your winter months. Anyway, enough babbling. Have a lovely day, my darlings. What? You're still here after the whole story? I really appreciate that, darlings. Please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't. And I always love to hear from you. Have a glorious day, my darlings.